Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 81, Movies of the 1990s. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancy Eaton. We're going to be taking a trip down memory lane a little bit like we do every week, but we're going to be taking a look at 90s movies this week. We're going to get into that in a second. So if you love movies from the 90s, boy, this is going to be a great episode for you. Yancy Eaton, my co-host, my friend from Florida, what's going on?
I'm not trying to instill bad karma on myself by saying this, but there is a major hurricane about to strike the eastern seaboard, and I'm a little relieved, and selfishly so, that it's not going to hit Florida. So thoughts and prayers, and I hope everybody's safe along the Carolinas, but very, very happy that it is not affecting Florida, because I think I tweeted this a couple days ago. I literally just finished the last repairs from Hurricane Irma about a year ago.
Yeah, that was something else.
Yeah, it was quite something. And, we had a little bit of a podcast hiatus, and Caveman obviously came on and helped fill the void. But, man, hurricanes suck. They are something else. It's hard to escape from them. I mean, what else to say? You guys know what a hurricane is. I'm not going to go too deep into it. But other than that, Chris, today was my 12-year anniversary of working at my current job.
Oh, and how's that going? You've been there 12 years, so you must be must be in bliss. You must be in professional bliss. Yes.
Living the dream. Professional bliss is about as accurate of a term as it can get. And I've lived there my entire adult life, the same job. And I'm about to turn 30. So all kinds of existential crises popping up in my life out of nowhere. So it's a really fun time to be Yance.
Yeah, I guess. Before we get started, I want to mention something. We like making friends around here. I mention that almost every week. And I also like listening to other podcasts. So I found a new podcast that I had never heard before. And I just connected with these guys on Twitter, and I started listening to their show. And my God, is it ever awesome. So I just want to give them a shout out. It's called Everyone Has a Podcast. So it's these three guys, but especially the two guys, Brian and Adam. And they're Canadian too. Adam's Canadian anyway. And so they do this podcast where they're just riffing on stuff. But this Adam guy, the thing that got me about it was this Adam guy decides that he wants to become a rapper. So he kind of like me, he's when you listen to the show, it's kind of like, you can't believe this guy's going to be a rapper, right? And is he serious or not? And so that he actually went and produced this whole rap song. And it's called The Power, and they played it on their podcast. He actually produced and sang the whole thing himself. I actually contacted these guys, and I was like, guys, I listened to the show. I listened to your rap song. I almost drove my car off the road. I was laughing so loud at this. It was so awesome. Yancy, you have to listen to it. I will send you a link to it. You got to give it a listen. Anybody out there, go and listen to Everyone Has a Podcast. And you got to find the episode where they do the rap song on it. It is, I think it's called the Old School episode or something. He's like this white guy who does not sound like he should be rapping, and he's singing about swimming pools full of wonton soup and lots of money and expensive barbecues and all this. It's just so funny. I just literally lost it. Anyway, I want to give them a shout out. Those guys are awesome. One thing about the show, I'd say it's pretty fair to say that we've gotten sort of two consistent pieces of feedback over the years that we've been doing this podcast. The first is that we don't cover the decade of the 90s enough. The second piece of feedback is that WKRP in Cincinnati is the best TV show ever. Maybe that's just my opinion. I don't know. But hopefully people agree. But definitely we've been hearing almost, I think, Yancy, since the first episode, that we don't cover the 90s enough, right?
Correct.
People just keep on this. So, I mean, I was born in 1969, and I started watching TV and movies at a very young age. I fell in love with, TV and movies and stuff in the 70s, and I continued right through the 80s. Unfortunately for me, when I got to the 90s, I basically spent that entire decade just going back and watching stuff that I liked from the 70s and 80s. It might be sad, but it's true.
And then that carried through to the 90s
yes.
and the 2000s.
It is, and I just keep repeating. I'm on repeat. Exactly. And for you, Yancy, I think, you being born in the late 80s, you basically grew up watching TV and movies from sort of 2000 on. Mostly,
correct.
Right? So
mostly,
as a result, whenever we do these podcasts, we tend to neglect the 90s, as a decade. And we hear about it, let me tell you. And we don't mean to. It's not like we hate the 90s or anything. It's just the matter of circumstances, I think, of both of us. we tend to miss out on talking about it. And it's like the 90s are like a black hole for us. You know, it falls right in between our generational experiences. Like I say, it tends to get overlooked. So we thought we would take the opportunity from time to time going forward to dedicate specific episodes just to the 90s. So this show, we're going to take a look at movies from the 90s. And really, who better to join us than our old friend and regular guest on the podcast, Caveman himself. That's our affectionate nickname for him. Caveman, Derek Myers. Derek, welcome back to the show, my good friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me back, Yancy.
Oh, man,
congratulations on 12 years having your job. Same job. Good job, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me back.
No problem. Anything? What's going on in the world of pop culture for you? Anything new and you want to report on?
Yeah, sure. A couple of quick things. You guys did a show on books last week, so I'm going to say that I just actually finished reading. I like Yancy, I read quite a bit, and I'm always looking for new books. I'm a big fan of the fantasy and science fiction genres. Shocker, I know. I just finished reading the book American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is an author who cut his teeth in comic books. He created a series called Sandman, which was very popular. The TV show Lucifer is based on Neil Gaiman's intellectual property. Anyway, this book is very well renowned. It's actually been turned into a television series. They're in the process, I believe, of shooting season 2 right now. But I read the book finally after a lot of prodding, and I really enjoyed it. It's it's a 600-page beefy kind of book. I thought it maybe ran a little too long. So it sort of dragged at the end, but I went and I watched season 1 of the show and loved it. So I don't think it's for everybody, but if you're a comic book fan, if you're a Neil Gaiman fan, if you're into that sort of fantasy sort of gods walking the earth kind of thing, it was pretty decent. So
nice.
Take a look. And Chris, you're going to love this. So,
What?
Again, don't want to surprise anybody, but I'm a big comic book nerd. Like, I have a comic book collection I have about 6,000 or 7,000 comic books in my collection. I've been doing this for 30 plus years.
Can I ask you a question regarding your comic?
Do.
If you have 6,000 or 7,000 comic books, do you have any Richie Rich comic books?
I thought about picking some up, and then I thought, no, why would I do that?
He has 7,000 comic books, Chris, and not a single Richie Rich. That is a shot at you like you've never seen before. What a burn.
You're telling me. Oh, that's a big burn. Oh.
So anyway, I have this massive collection, and I'm trying to find very select issues. And so I have a very short list that I've been looking for a very long time. And I was going to a buddy's place on the weekend, and there was a flea market on the way, and I knew that they often sell comic books there, so I decided to stop. And sure enough, there were comic book vendors. I couldn't find what I wanted, but I got to talk to some interesting people about comic books. While I was there, I decided to check with the flea market. And in one of the booths, the guy was selling Star Wars memorabilia from the ages, from the 1970s right up to like today.
Nice.
And I got my hands on a board game called Star Wars Escape from Death Star. Oh,
I remember that game. It goes out like a spokes of a wheel, and you got to try and get out.
Yes,
I know that one. Yes, I know it.
I couldn't believe that I found this game. I got it for $10.
Nice.
It has the pieces, the box, the instruction, and now it's beat up. Don't get me wrong, because I went online and before I bought it, I'm like, I wonder what it's worth. And a brand new mint condition copy goes for about $100. The guy wanted $10. I'm like, sold. Here it is. I grabbed it and took off because I think maybe he was going to try and charge me more money for it when he realized it was only $10. Mm-hmm. So I can't wait to play this game. I bought it. I thought of you.
Yeah, it had the little colorful pieces, and then you had like the characters, like they had like green and like, they were like monochromatic colors. And if I remember correctly, there was a spinner with R2-D2 on it.
Yep. Yes. And on the cover of the box, it has some of the characters from the movies, like still images from the movies. Yep. And R2-D2 is spelled ARTOODETOO, and C-3PO is SEETHREEPIO. Instead of the actual letters and numbers, they spelled it out.
Phonetically,
you gotta think, whoever was making this game, when they made it, they had probably never seen the movie because the game was probably commissioned before the movie actually was released. So I love finding these things like this where this is right out of my childhood. I never owned this game, but a few of my friends did. And when I saw it, I was ecstatic, and I couldn't wait to drop $10 and pick up this piece of my childhood.
Okay, so two things about it. Number one, I remember back then seeing their names, R2-D2 and C-3PO, being spelled out phonetically. I've seen that more than once. That's not the first time. And that's number one. Number two, you and I do not live that far from each other. So when would you like to? We're gonna get off this. When are we gonna have me down for a night? I'll come down. We'll have some beers and we'll play Escape from the Death Star. So just
I love it.
We're doing this. I'm in. This is no question.
Yancy, you're welcome to join us, but it's a long drive for a little tabletop adventure.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I'm still here, guys.
If you would like to get on a plane and come up to Canada and join us, we have great beer here. But I don't think, Caveman, you and I haven't got together since last year's concert that we went to see ZZ Top. So it's time that we got together. We also spent a whole night doing a commentary on Caddyshack, if you remember that. We did a whole hour and a half long commentary on Caddyshack. This is the kinds of things we do together. And the next time we get together, we are going to play The Escape from the Death Star. It's going to be awesome, I tell you. But in the meantime, what do you say we get started on tonight's episode? Are you guys game?
Absolutely.
All right, let's hit it. Here we go. Do millennials write in each other's school yearbooks? Do you even have yearbooks?
You think we're like monsters or something? Yes, of course.
Oh man, you smell like fish heads.
I can't remember. I don't know if it's A sharp or B flat.
Kids suck.
Young prepubescent boys.
I'll show you a tremor.
That's my mom's favorite piece.
She's a mama. She's Mama Fratelli.
I'm basically a celebrity and kind of a big deal.
Holy shit. Okay, so like I mentioned at the top, we're going to be covering movies from the 1990s. So there's a lot of things to cover. We're not going to do a typical top 5 list. I just want to talk about sort of the decade. We'll start with the decade as a whole. And I'm just wondering, what is your overall impression of the 90s as a decade of film? Because for me, this, how can I say this? The 70s for me had a feel in regard to movies. There was, if you look at the 70s, there was the whole, deification of the director and the move away from the old studio system. You had movies like Easy Rider, they became these big hits, and directors like Dennis Hopper suddenly found themselves at the forefront of Hollywood. There were all these disaster films like The Poseidon Adventure, The Towering Inferno, and Airport and stuff like that. And then you also had the advent of the blockbuster film with Jaws and Star Wars. And then the 80s, to me, had a real feel as well, because there was a big shift toward sort of teenagers in film. John Hughes led the pack. There were lots of comedies. And, to me, I'm not really sure if the 90s has a feel. What do you guys think? What do you think of the themes and stuff? Caveman, why don't we start with you? But do the 90s movies overall have a quote-unquote feel to them? And if so, what do you think it is?
So I agree with you to a certain extent. Before the podcast, I've actually reached out to a few of my peers because I'm a few years younger than you, Chris. I was born in 1974, so in 1990 I was 16. That was when I started, really becoming aware of pop culture and developing tastes. What do you like? What do you not like? And I went away to university in 93. So 93 to 97, I'm in my early 20s, and it's a time in your life when you're very impressionable on a lot of things. And this was me. I was, right in the 90s. And so I asked a lot of my friends today, what do you think? What do you think? And the overwhelming response and I agree with, was the 90s almost feels like a forgotten decade or an overlooked decade when it comes to movies initially. And exactly like you said, the 70s has a very distinct style. The 80s movies have very distinct style. And then even in today in the 2000s and the 2010s, the movies have distinct styles and certain genres are big. But the 90s, on first glance, is almost meh, it came, it went, whatever. But the more I started to think about it, the more I felt that you can't overlook or you shouldn't forget that the 90s movies, a lot of it was sort of the rise of the independent movie. It was a generation of kids who grew up with camcorders and portable videotapes, and it was the age when amateurs could become filmmakers, and that golden ring of, well, only the best of the elite could ever get here because the studios will never see them. You had people who were young upcoming filmmakers. It's I didn't go to film school, I went to films. And I believe that's something Quentin Tarantino has said on more than one occasion. And he's a great example. And I'm sure we're going to talk about him a little bit tonight. It was, this opportunity for filmmakers to make movies real passion projects from a different perspective. It wasn't the corporation, it wasn't the studio, it wasn't this big conglomerate machine pushing out movies. You had these opportunities for these small independent filmmakers to make these movies and bring them to film festivals and put them in front of people who could help them get distribution. And it launched the career in the 90s of a lot of directors that did not take what up until then was a traditional path into the field of film.
I'm going to just make a note of this in terms of independent films, and we'll come back and get into that a little bit more in depth, because I think you make a good point. That is one of the most prevalent things that came out of the 90s for me. But before we get to that, Yancy, so you were obviously very young in the 90s, but I think back, I was young in the 70s. Like for me, like being 7, 8, 9 years old, that was the 70s for me. But I was like totally into movies at that age. I just loved pop culture at that age. And I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, kind of growing up as a really young kid in the 90s and then looking back on it, did the 90s have a quote unquote feel in terms of movies? What's your take on that?
Well, I think Caveman, he articulated it pretty nicely. The one thing that I was going to say was the same thing that he made a point of, which is totally unoriginal, to just piggyback off what the first person said and just run with it. You just cherry pick the smart things that he said and then take it as your own. This was the first generation that we saw where, like he said, there was more of a democratization of people making films, right? And you can see this by how diverse they are. You can Google any list of like best 90s movies or best movies of the 90s, and you see such a wide range of types of movies. You have like really serious movies, like a Good Will Hunting or a Schindler's List, really, really serious, critically acclaimed movies. But then you also see like the advent of super niche comedies, like, really, really specific comedies. Even the bad, quote unquote, bad movies are movies that I really, really enjoyed. Like, some of my favorite bad movies of all time are like Space Jam or Ace Ventura. Those are movies that, like, you could kind of see like a pathway to those being like an airplane type movie of like the 70s and the 80s, but they were their own thing. They were super, super specific. And this is like, I think, the first time where we really saw all these different movie companies and production companies taking risks on something that didn't have exactly mass appeal. You know what I mean? They found that, like, hey, this can be lucrative. We can make movies on a relatively cheap budget and actually start funding more projects, as opposed to putting all of our eggs in, a handful of proverbial baskets and just hoping to strike it big on like these huge franchises. There's just so many different styles of movie. It's really hard to peg down like what the major like overarching thing was. Like, you have movies like Fight Club and like The Sixth Sense and The Silence of the Lambs, really, really dark, like crazy movies that just stick with you and are haunting and just, but then you also have like movies that are just pure entertainment. Like you have like the Jurassic Parks and like the Forrest Gumps, where I'm not sure if they're trying to say anything, super groundbreaking or push any type of social agenda. They're just really interesting, like fun to watch movies that you don't necessarily have to get a lot out of. So as far as like overarching themes, I don't really think there was one. I think it was just the first time that we saw more people getting involved with it. And to piggyback off of that, I think we're going to start seeing like a new revival in movies within like the next 10 to 15 years. Whenever we start seeing all these kids who were internet native from the time they grew up, they had smartphones when they were 5 or 6 years old. They're always around a camera. Every ounce of their life has always been recorded. And you're going to start seeing people who are always aware that they are being recorded and that they're being watched. And almost like the calculated way that they show themselves, you're going to see like this completely different genre of pop culture come out that's going to be unlike anything we have ever seen before. Like, what we consider an amateur nowadays, like these kids are going to be coming out basically like with more polished and more camera ready and with bigger ideas and knowing how to get attention and having done so much trial and error by the time they were even in high school. You know what I mean? I think it's just going to be really, really interesting. Not all of it's going to be great, but I'm kind of curious to see where it goes from there.
Well, then instead of taking a look at the 90s as an overall, sort of feel, what about, like, we've talked before on this podcast about different genres of films. We talked about our favorite horror movies and our favorite comedies, our favorite romantic comedies and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just curious, do you think there were any genres of movies that maybe sort of had their advent in the decade or thrived in the decade, or did any genres maybe kind of disappear? And
I think I'll jump in first real quick, Caveman. Definitely animated movies. So like, you remember,
that's a good point. Good point.
This was the 90s. This is whenever Disney made their comeback, right? The Lion King, Aladdin,
Toy Story.
And
Toy Story.
computer generated stuff, you know?
Yeah, like, Toy Story was the first completely computer animated film, and, all three of the movies in that franchise are some of the most critically acclaimed movies of all time. Like, how often is it that you see, like, an entire trilogy that everybody just thinks top to bottom is great? That one movie doesn't take away from the others.
The original Star Wars trilogy.
I was just going to say Star Wars.
Well, Star Wars. True. But think about that's a small project that I may have overlooked. But
it's a small independent film. Yeah.
Right? If that's your comparison, if that's your measuring stick, and that's the only thing you measure up to, that's high praise.
Definitely.
Yeah, that is high praise. But the other genre being like, I think serious horror movies, like actually well done productions. Like, think about this, like Silence of the Lambs was up for like Best Picture. Like, I'm pretty sure it was one of the first, if not the very first, to be nominated for like, like basically like the movie of the year kind of thing. I know that's not the exact title of the.
It won Best Picture in '93. Yeah.
Or exactly. It won Best Picture. Thank you, Chris. So like, I think those different types of like subsets that aren't necessarily mainstream, they started getting a little bit more clout, both critically and like more widespread commercial success. What do you think, Caveman?
I'll sort of tackle that in reverse order. You're absolutely right. So I had a bunch of notes written down, and horror movies was on there because from 1996 to 2000, I worked at Blockbuster Video. And for all you young kids out there, we're talking video cassette tapes that you had to go to the store, rent, return when you were done, make sure you rewind, be kind, rewind. And if you went to the store and all the copies were out, that was too bad. You had to wait till the next day. It was no downloading, streaming, on demand, in your pocket whenever you need it. It was old school video cassettes. So for 4 to 5 years in the late 90s, I was right in the thick of the movie industry. Obviously as a consumer and as a proprietor of pushing those movies to other people. But I remember when in '96 when Scream came out, it was not originally received very well in the theater because like horror genre was sort of dead. It was seen as like over the top super slasher films, excessive blood, excessive gore. Don't take it seriously. And then Wes Craven comes out with Scream, and he casts Drew Barrymore and Neve Campbell and a few other relatively popular actors at the time. And people were like, oh, well, let's give this a try. And he sort of reinvented turbocharged the horror genre again. He brought life back to it. And I mean, given that his history with the genre, it was pleasant to see. Like, here's a guy who isn't just a one-trick pony. He's been watching what's going on in the world and pop culture, and he's reinvigorated this genre that he helped create in the first place. So, I mean, I'm not a big fan of horror movies, but Scream was fantastic, and what it did for that genre is notable, and that happened in the late 90s.
I agree, and in just building on that in terms of horror movies, if you go back in time to that time around 96, leading up to then, the horror movie genre had kind of ran its course. Like, it had all those umpteen sequels of Friday the 13th. There was all those, like, dozens of those Freddy Krueger movies that came out. And just when it seemed like the horror genre was over and dead, along comes Scream. And really, it flipped the genre on its head because it played with the audience's expectations of typical horror movies, right? So definitely, yeah, that's a really good point. So you could say that the 90s were a period when horror movies were kind of reinvented,
For sure.
I think that's a good one. What about because I love talking about comedies, and because I've always said, for me, comedies were like at their peak in the 70s and 80s. What did you think about comedy films in the 90s? Caveman, we'll start with you.
Of all the genres we're going to talk about, 90s comedies is probably the genre I know the least about. I mean, I love comedies, but the 90s comedies didn't really speak to me. I didn't really care for, I guess, the kind of humor that was funny at the time. And so, like, Seinfeld was a very popular television show. When it was on in its initial run, I didn't get it. And maybe I was just too young. Maybe I couldn't identify with the characters. I didn't enjoy it that much. And same with Friends. When it was first on in its early season, I didn't really click with me. And so when you had movies like, Billy Madison and Tommy Boy is exception. I love Tommy Boy, but you get some of these sort of stupid comedies that came out in the 90s, the early and mid 90s especially. They didn't speak to me. Ace Ventura, like I couldn't get into it. Didn't really care for it. To me, I almost felt like it hurt the genre.
I agree with you 100%. I strongly believe that the 1990s were the death of the comedy. Like I said, the 70s and 80s were rampant with comedies, and they died off in the 90s. Other than maybe, like I was talking to my wife about this, and she's like, well, what about American Pie? Okay, well, maybe that. I mean, I didn't particularly care for the movie, but other than that.
But that was like what, 98, 9? I don't have the date of that one in front of me, but that was definitely the late 90s.
99. It was right at the end of the decade.
Yeah, and that was sort of the first comedy that I can recall. Well, that and Austin Powers were sort of the only comedies in the 90s that I felt I could really get into, that I enjoyed, that I wanted to see again, that I continue to watch over and over. And I think with American Pie, I wasn't that much older than those characters, so I think it was easier for me to relate to those stories. Not that I did some of the crazy things that they did, but I identified more with American Pie than I ever did with Billy Madison or Ace Ventura or anything else that was coming out in the early 90s.
The only one that stood out for me from the 90s, because it was kind of reminiscent of the 70s and 80s type comedies, was Happy Gilmore. Because it was eminently rewatchable. I could watch that over and over again, and it had a kind of a familiarity to it, and it was a little bit off kilter and kind of goofy. But a lot of the other comedies in the 90s, I just didn't like. Maybe Groundhog Day. You know, I was
just going to counter with a couple movies. Okay?
Please do.
Just so you guys can like refresh your memories. Okay. The one point I'll make about comedies in the 90s, and I'm not saying this just to be contrarian from you guys' viewpoints, but Chris, you and I, we've reviewed several comedies from back in the day, the 70s, 80s, and stuff. Mm-hmm. We did Airplane, and what were some of the other ones?
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles. Thank you. Okay, I'm not saying that those movies were not funny. They were funny, and I did enjoy them. I think from like an overall like tone and how they actually present these comedies, a lot of the comedies from the 90s actually feels like more realistic movies. Like think of Office Space. Think about the interactions between them. It's a comedy, but it's not like an overt like punchline, here's a prop. It's not so overt like just purely scripted comedy. It's more relational, and you actually think about people like in a real sense. Like what's a better? I'm trying to think of like even a different example. Like There's Something About Mary, or like The Big Lebowski. Those aren't something that they wouldn't be your first inkling of like, oh, a comedy, but like it's more realistic as far as like the interactions between people. Like you guys are really missing out on like a lot of good movies, like My Cousin Vinny, or Friday, or I'm trying to think of another one, or like 10 Things I Hate About You, or The Wedding Singer. Like there's so many there, and like I said, they're more kind of like rom-com, like actual interrelational, like real people interacting with real stuff, as opposed to just like this is a movie where people say funny things and do funny things. It's more of like the reality show genre kind of made its way into the comedies. And I mean, are you guys picking up what I'm putting down here at all, or does that not make any sense at all?
No, I understand what you're saying, but I just believe that the quote unquote sort of comedy genre just did not, let's just say it did not thrive in the 90s, and it didn't necessarily thrive into the 2000s either. I still think it's a bit of a lost art form. I really do. And I know that's me stuck in the past, but I believe that the true movie comedy is a lost art form. And it started to die in the 90s, and it hasn't made it come back yet.
So maybe we look at it a little bit differently. I think that perhaps if we go back to 10 minutes ago when we were just talking about the reinvention of the horror film, maybe that's what's happened in the 90s and we just sort of missed it. It was the traditional comedy from, if you look at sort of the 80s and late 70s as a quote traditional comedy, maybe by the 90s, to Yancy's point, you look at what else was going on in the world in pop culture and other mediums, and what was classified as comedy has changed because humor changes, because it's often contextual to what's going on in the world around you. And maybe, Yancy sees it better than we do because he's coming at it from a very different perspective. And Yancy, in all fairness, every movie you just named, I've seen all of them and enjoyed most of them, but not laugh out loud comedies. And My Cousin Vinny's a great example. I literally watched it about a week ago because it had been a long time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I don't think I actually laughed out loud once. And to me, that wouldn't classify as a comedy to me. If I'm not laughing, I have a hard time classifying it as comedy. But maybe that's just because of the way I classify them. If in my mind, a comedy is just use it, like you said, joke, punchline, prop, guy falls down, gets hit with a pie, joke. Like that to me is funny.
Yeah. The one thing I'll add, I don't want to like beat this horse too much, but I think I come at it differently just because, and Chris and I talked about this just ad nauseum on past shows. Is I feel like a lot of the comedy from the 60s, 70s, the 80s, to me personally, I struggle with finding that stuff funny just because societally, like there's many things that were funny back then that are not funny now. And I've kind of been, I've been programmed to not think that those things are funny. And, maybe that is like a flaw to some sort of political correctness is, everything should be funny. Some of the, is it George Carlin who makes like the joke where he talks like he literally goes for the lowest common possible denominator, and like he basically makes a joke about starving kids in Africa, right? And everybody says like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. You're only supposed to, you're supposed to attack people from above. You're supposed to attack people of power. That's what comedy is. And like he really challenged that notion by saying like, I'm going to make fun of everything. Do you guys think there's something to that where it's like, Delirious is funny, but Delirious is very problematic. And if Eddie Murphy,
so of its time, we just talked about this and we said you could absolutely not show that on TV today. It is so dated and inappropriate based on today's standards. And if you look at it with today's lens, it is so wrong for so many reasons. But as a youngster, I can remember watching it, laughing my ass off hundreds of times, repeating the jokes verbatim and thinking this is the funniest thing that it's ever been invented. But you look at it now and you're just like, oh my God.
So do you guys think that that's the main constraint is simply that, you're being asked as a comedian basically to kind of toe the line a little bit more. And there's so many more topics that are, off bounds, and, you can basically commit, career suicide by making, basically like making jokes at like the wrong demographic or the wrong group or, somebody that was marginalized throughout history. Like that's dangerous. Maybe there's something to be said about that.
I will disagree with that. And I will disagree with that by saying two words: South Park. I think, Trey Parker and Matt Stone proved that you can make fun of everything and nothing is off bounds if you do it properly, if you do it well, if you do it with an unbelievable comic talent that they had. I just think that there wasn't a lot of really talented comedians in the 90s that were able to pull it off. You're right. Times changed. And we've talked about this before on the podcast lots, Yancy. Times have changed. You go back and watch Animal House, you're like, you can't laugh at that stuff. That's like horrific. You know what I mean? But so because times have changed. So you're right. A lot more things are off bounds. But I think, something like South Park comes along and says, hey, we're going to challenge the notions of what is off bounds and what isn't. And we're going to make fun of everything. And they just do it in such a funny way that I don't think I've ever laughed any more in my life than I've laughed at South Park. So, and this is from somebody who loves the 70s and 80s.
But you just said though that I didn't think that there were that many good comedians in the 90s that could pull it off. So like you're basically saying that like an entire generation is not funny. Like that can't be it. There are other factors at play as opposed to like the funny gene skipped an entire generation. Like there's not
enough Canadians making movies in the 90s. I guess it must have been what it was, right? Another thing I just was thinking about. We talked about horror movies and comedies, and I mentioned earlier that the 70s was, as a decade, had a lot of disaster movies, but we saw a lot of that going on in the 90s too. Because I don't know if it was because of the impending Y2K, if you remember back to that time. But as it got near the end of the decade, there was a whole bunch of disaster movies that came out, probably reflecting the angst of the general public because of Y2K. I don't know. I haven't really explored that. But I mean, you had movies like Armageddon and Independence Day and Deep Impact and even Godzilla that kind of reflected the time. So I think the disaster movie is one that kind of reared its head again in the 90s, right?
Yeah, I'll give you that. I think you'd have to almost broaden it a bit. It's more the big budget action, blockbuster kind of movies sort of had a comeback. It almost felt like through the mid 90s, there were a lot of great movies, but there were, from my recollection, not as many big, we'll call them like spectacle event movies. And then you had, Independence Day, you had Armageddon, you had Men in Black. You like suddenly you had these like every summer. What's the big movie? It's coming out on the July 4th weekend. What is it? And it was something huge, $100 million budget and explosions. And you're not winning any performance Oscars for those movies. Those movies are pure entertainment. You buy your popcorn and you sit down and you enjoy the movie and you take it for what it is and you love it. And I would say that it's more disaster movies lend themselves to that kind of storytelling. So I think that's probably, in my mind, why you see that more, especially towards the end of the 90s.
I'm just thinking of Yancy, something that you mentioned, and kind of we brought this up before in the podcast about how like times change and things, we progress as a society. I will say that the 90s was definitely groundbreaking because you saw a breakthrough, especially for black filmmakers like John Singleton's Boys in the Hood, Spike Lee's movies. But there was also the emergence of like LGBT films like The Birdcage and Boys Don't Cry. So I think the 90s was quite groundbreaking from a film perspective. Maybe some of it has to do with the independent films, which we'll come back to in a second. But I think of the 90s as groundbreaking. I will give it that. Do you agree with that, Yancy?
I agree with that, Chris, and I not to jump around too much, but like I do like your point that you were talking about. Like, you've seen a lot of disaster movies. Like, just to mention a couple more, Waterworld, which was a flop, but that's post-apocalyptic. Yep. The Perfect Storm, the production was in like the end of the 90s. I think it was actually released in 2000, but that's another example. You had Twister.
Twister's a good one. Yeah.
You mentioned like Deep Impact. There were a lot of movies that played on, even The Matrix. Like Take a Shot. Yancy mentions The Matrix. There are so many of these. There are so many of these movies where it does reference, the fact that all of a sudden technology has exploded. Okay, we used to not have the internet, and now we have the internet, and mankind, goes through thousands and thousands of years of slowly and incrementally improving things to where all of a sudden we have every piece of information ever known to humankind at our fingertips all the time. And instead of us being given decades and even hundreds of years to slowly assimilate to that, it was thrust onto us basically overnight, right? So you have the fear of technology. You have all of a sudden global warming being moved into the mainstream, and that's why you do see so many of those, like the Deep Impact type movies or the Twister type movies. All of a sudden like rampant hurricanes and all these things. You have that, and then of course like the Y2K scare, which is really just another indictment on people not being sure about artificial intelligence and technology and we're being thrust into this future that we really didn't have much of a say in, and all of a sudden it was just here overnight, and there was no acclimation period whatsoever. So I think if you went off sheer number, I don't have like a list in front of me or anything, but just went off the sheer number of actual disaster type post-apocalyptic like end of the world scenarios, I think you'd see like a huge spike on the bar graph in between like the mid 90s heading right up to like 2000. And then after Y2K, obviously, all of a sudden that wasn't in vogue anymore. But same thing with, December 21st, 2012, the day that, the Mayan calendar, everybody thought that the world was going to end. Coincidentally, that's the day my nephew was born. Maybe that'd be a cool story for him to tell his girlfriends or whatever. But, we saw another spiking in those same types of like end of world scenarios. They weren't very good movies, but that summer of 2011, the summer of 2012, you started seeing those pop back up. So it's always like a reaction to like whatever everybody's talking about or what the general feel or the most prevalent fear of the time is. I think you see more and more movies being pushed out that kind of fills that need for people, whether they want it or not.
Now, Caveman, you mentioned earlier about independent films. You want to come back and talk a little bit about that? Because I think of the 90s, too. One of the first things I think about is sort of the advent and sort of the dominance of the independent film. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I want to talk about that, but I want to sort of sidestep into it. So in the course of in less than a month, in 1994, between mid-October and mid-November, three huge movies were released. Well, three great movies were released that if I made a list of my top 10 or top 20 favorite movies, these ones always make the list. Two of them make my top 5 every time. In October 94, we got Pulp Fiction and Shawshank Redemption released on the same day. Mm-hmm. And then less than a month later, we had the independent film Clerks by Kevin Smith released. Now, again, as someone who worked a lot of years at Blockbuster Video, the film Clerks spoke to me in a way that really no movie had ever spoken to me before. This was literally me and my friends on the camera, on the screen, and you had the characters having conversations about Star Wars and Jaws and all sorts of crazy things. And it's like you're watching it going, that's us. We've had that conversation. We've had a conversation just like that. And really, for me, Clerks and Pulp Fiction are sort of the measuring stick that I use when I'm talking about a lot of movies from the 90s. These are two movies that I believe they're actually both produced by Miramax, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
On relatively small budgets. Like Kevin Smith's Clerks was made on a total shoestring budget.
Under 30 grand or something.
Yeah,
right?
It was shot in black and white. He did. Yep. Yeah, again, it's if you want to know more about it, take a look, but I imagine half your listeners are probably Kevin Smith fans and have probably gone down that road, so I won't waste their time right now. And Quentin Tarantino obviously is, one of today's great filmmakers. He's hugely popular, famous. Pulp Fiction was his second big film after Reservoir Dogs. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I love so much about both Clerks and Pulp Fiction, besides the fact that they're not like your typical studio film, is both of these movies are dialogue-driven movies.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Pulp Fiction, the performances are outstanding, and they got nominated for awards up and down, as it rightly deserved.
But it's the script,
but both Clerks and Pulp Fiction are movies that I have dubbed the audio onto a cassette, a CD, ripped it onto a podcast, whatever, and listened to it as like a radio play, even though I'm not seeing the visual components of these movies. Now, in all fairness, I've seen both of these movies so many times, in my mind, I'm seeing the scenes. But both of these movies, the dialogue is so great. It's so realistic. It's so perfect that these movies are carried by the script, by the dialogue. And I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. Quentin Tarantino said, I didn't go to film school. I went to films. And he listened to people. And he and Kevin Smith has basically said the same kind of thing. I wanted the characters to sound like real people. And these movies were both excellent examples of this. So anyway, that's my little rant on that.
I agree with you 100% on both those movies. I love both those movies. I saw both those movies in the theater when they came out. Pulp Fiction, definitely. In terms of the dialogue, I think that Tarantino really sort of cut his teeth in his first movie in Reservoir Dogs. The opening scene of Reservoir Dogs, all the guys sitting around a table discussing whether or not they should tip and why tipping should be acceptable or not acceptable in society. You're watching that going, what am I watching? Like, what am I watching? It's just this unbelievable dialogue as the camera just goes around the table. And it's just everybody having a dialogue about this. And unbelievable. Oh, yeah. No, I definitely agree. I'm curious, Yancy, you've obviously seen Pulp Fiction and Clerks. Have you seen both those movies? I'm assuming you have, but have you?
I've only seen parts of Clerks, but I've definitely seen Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction, obviously. Yeah, Pulp Fiction is one of the best. I think it's one of the best American films of all time. It was definitely the best film of the 90s for me. And really the success of Pulp Fiction really paved the way for those independent movies of the decade that we talked about. Miramax, you mentioned, Caveman was basically it was an independent movie making studio, and it suddenly jumped to the forefront of Hollywood because of like Clerks and Pulp Fiction. But other independent films were huge too. Like when you think of like ones that I personally like Being John Malkovich and El Mariachi. Remember El Mariachi was and True Romance, and even movies like Before Sunrise and Good Will Hunting and Dazed and Confused. They're all independent movies that were made outside the traditional Hollywood system. And really, if you think about it, in 1996, with the Oscars, back then, Yancy, they only had 5 nominees for Best Picture, right? Instead of 10 that they do now. And of the 5 nominees for Best Picture in 96, 4 of them were independent movies. Jerry Maguire was the only one that was made from a mainstream Hollywood studio. Because the others were The English Patient, you had Fargo, Secrets and Lies, and Shine, all independent films. It was sort of the peak, but yeah, independent movies. So I would say, so the 90s so far, what we're getting from is the independent genre and the rebirth of the horror film, the death of the comedy somewhat, and a lot more disaster films coming back in. One other thing I would like to touch base on, and this has come up on the podcast many times before, and this is my sort of, I don't want to say hatred, and maybe hatred's a strong word, but my disdain for CGI in film. I guess, though, the CGI sort of really began with 89's The Abyss, right? With that water tentacle. But I would say, I think everybody kind of feels that the advent of CGI in film was probably Jurassic Park in 93. And funny enough, I still think it's the best CGI in a movie ever, still to this day. And I will admit there's some good uses of CGI in movies, but they're, like I say, good Jurassic Park, bad anything George Lucas has ever touched. And also the Scorpion King. If you've ever seen that,
that's so bad.
God, so bad. I was going to make that joke,
but yeah, but CGI in film really sort of got its start in the 90s, especially with Jurassic Park, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So so those are all of our conclusions on that. I tell you what I'd like to do, guys, if you don't mind. I'd like to get your opinions on some movies from the 90s, if I could. So how about if we do this? I'm going to just name a movie, and I'd just like to know your overall opinion on it and your take on it, okay?
Sure.
Caveman, we'll start with you.
Yep.
Titanic.
what to say about Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
For the long time, it was the highest grossing movie ever. Cameron claimed that he couldn't make the movie before then because technology didn't exist to do what he wanted to do on camera, which we heard him say again when he made Avatar. I liked it. I didn't love it.
That's interesting. See, I think, like I say, I think Pulp Fiction is the best movie to come out of the 90s.
Agreed.
But I'm a big fan of Titanic. When it came out, I loved it. To me, Titanic is Pulp Fiction and Titanic are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum, because Titanic is sort of that traditional. To me, that's Gone with the Wind for this generation.
It's an epic.
It's an epic, unbelievable, sweeping thing to go. And to this day, I don't care what anyone says. The special effects in that movie hold up. They hold up. It is just an unbelievable visual experience to watch Titanic. It's bigger than life. It is unbelievable. Whereas Pulp Fiction, on the other hand, is just gritty, and it's smaller. It's independent. It's like almost like complete the antithesis of Hollywood filmmaking, you know? Yancy, what are your thoughts on Titanic?
I've only seen it once. I felt like it lasted forever, but that's not like it's a knock on it. It was very, very good. I thought that some of the scenes were amazing in it. I remember watching, I think I was like 12 years old. I literally haven't watched it in almost 17, 18 years, I think. But I can still remember so many scenes of that so vividly, just because, like you guys said, it was so well done. Like when I think of the 90s, honestly, like it's one of the first movies that comes to mind, just because it's like, it feels like such a time capsule movie. Yeah. Like I always think of like Titanic, Clueless, like Saving Private Ryan. Like those are like the first couple of movies that always come to me. It's not one of my favorite movies, but I mean, you have to respect like what they did with it. It's just, I mean, it pushed special effects to like such a level, and everybody, like all the other, huge blockbuster movies that you saw come after that, kind of like owes that to them, because they kind of broke the mold as far as being really, really inventive and just wowing audiences with their special effects.
All right, here's one. End of the decade, one Best Picture in '99, American Beauty. What's your take on it, Caveman?
Loved it. Loved it. Can't tell you how much I loved it. I went to see this in the theater on the opening night.
Yep, I did too.
Opening night. I got out of the movie. My wife and I went to see it. Walked to the movie. I turned to her and I said, "That's going to win the Best Picture." And she's like, "No." And I said, "Absolutely, without a doubt, that movie is going to win Best Picture this year." And she enjoyed it, but she didn't think it was that good. And I called my parents and said, "Mom, Dad, you got to go see this movie. It's going to win the Oscar this year." And my mom's like, "Oh, okay." My parents do not go to the movies very often. They usually rely on us to make a recommendation. So they went to see it the next night. They both hated it. They were so angry that I recommended they go see this movie. My mom she was like, "I think you owe us a free movie because we wasted our night on this because you said so, and it was terrible." And I realized that it was sort of, I'd reached a point in my life where this movie spoke to a certain audience, and my parents were not a part of that demographic. It was, a slice of life of America at the time. This is a somewhat true, accurate portrayal of things that could or probably were happening. And I don't think that my parents, with a very conservative outlook, could wrap their heads around these kinds of things happening in society at all, let alone at that point in their life. But I loved it. I still enjoy it. I think it's great. It was nominated and won all sorts of awards, up and down, well deserved. Despite what we now know about Kevin Spacey, he did a great performance in the movie. I would have no problem sitting down and watching it right now. Loved it.
See,
I would certainly watch that than Titanic if given the choice.
Wow. See, when I think back on, like, I'm a big Oscar fan, and when I think back on the Oscars, I think of American Beauty as one of the worst pictures to ever win Best Picture. I don't think it should have won that year. I thought The Sixth Sense was so much better as a film. Yancy, have you ever seen American Beauty by curiosity? Because 1999 is like your favorite year for movies. So I'm just wondering.
I have seen American Beauty.
What are your thoughts?
This is one of the movies when I first got married. My wife's like, "Wait, you haven't seen American Beauty? Like, please go watch it." So I did. Again, it's hard to be critical and not sound like you completely hate a movie. I don't hate it, but like you, Chris, I don't think that it was worthy of all the accolades that it got, just especially considering the fact that 1999 was such a strong class of movies to begin with. It is a weird movie, and like Caveman, you just mentioned, like, yeah, I could watch it again today and like have no issue with it. For me, it's really hard sometimes for me to parse the artist from the art. And this is one of those perfect examples, like a predatory, like middle-aged man who's like lusting over a high school, like cheerleader type girl. That's kind of like dead on arrival for me, especially like when you find out like what type of person he actually is in real life. I don't know. Like I said, I understand that this is a piece of art and you're supposed to be able to parse the two and be objective about things. But the premise of the movie, just to start, is, I don't know. It asks a lot of me that I don't feel like particularly comfortable in like just indulging in, if that makes sense.
Okay, Caveman, what's your take on 1996's Independence Day?
It was a fun movie that I went to the theater more than once that summer to see. So I was away at university. This was, I think, the first or second summer that I was away from home, unsupervised, as a young man, living in my own apartment. I didn't have the burdens of class. I literally had the summer off. I had a part-time job and a lot of free time on my hands, so I saw a lot of movies that summer. And I must have saw that movie, 3 or 4 times in the theater. It was very entertaining. I enjoyed it. When it comes on TV and I see it, I'm like, oh, I'm going to watch this. It did, in my mind, it delivered what it promised. You're going to see this movie. They're going to fight aliens. Will Smith's going to be the hero, and he's going to get to fly a spaceship. And, it hits all the right emotional notes when you just want to turn off your brain and be entertained. And it delivered. The effects were decent enough. The movie certainly had its problems. The script wasn't great, but I got exactly what I expected every time, and I cheered at the end every time.
Every time it comes on TV, I'm like, oh, and I watch it. And my wife is like, you're such a movie snob. How can you like this stupid movie? But like you, there's something about it that is just unbelievably entertaining. It's fun to watch that movie. I like watching it. I have a lot of fun. Yancy, Independence Day, what are your thoughts on it?
Couldn't agree with you guys more. I think it is a good, bad movie.
Yes.
I don't think like not everything has to be high art, Chris. You and I used to argue about this all the time, and like I basically I acquiesce to the fact that like, hey, you know what? Sometimes some people just want to turn their brain off and like have fun and watch a dumb movie, and this is that. I think Will Smith is awesome in it. I think he's even now, like he hasn't had like a bunch of hits the last few years, but there was a period there where he was the highest paid actor every single year for several years, and deservedly so. Like this dude is magnetic. He's super charismatic on the big screen, and like you said, Caveman, I just remember being like a kid watching this the first time, and I know that it's like it's such a highly fictionalized account of like aliens trying to invade Earth, but I cared so much. I knew it was bad, and I knew it was corny and cheesy, and like the crazy, what's the crazy dad guy or whatever, like,
oh yeah, Quaid, Randy
Dennis,
Quaid,
or yeah, sorry, he's not Dennis Quaid, Jesus, like he's legit crazy now, which I think makes like it all the more fun. Like he's like a legit tinfoil hat kind of guy. But this movie was just like, man, it was just like a lightning rod. It was so fun. Everybody watched it. I remember everybody talking about it. Just like the perfect summer movie. Like I know that's kind of like easy and cheap to say, but like just a perfect summer blockbuster. And I wish that we had more like weird kooky movies like this that are like the movie of the season, the movie of the summer, as opposed to just like another comic book movie followed by another comic book movie followed by a comic book movie that introduces like more characters that are going to fight together in another comic book movie. Like I love that this was original and it was its own thing.
Okay, I'm got one last movie, maybe the most controversial movie of the decade of the 90s. 1999. Yancy, you're going to love 1999. But Caveman, I got to start with you. 1999's The Blair Witch Project.
I was just about to say, this has to be Blair Witch Project. So, Yancy, have you seen Blair Witch Project?
I have.
Okay, good. So, if anyone hasn't seen it, I'm going to talk about it. Spoil. So, if you haven't seen The Blair Witch Project and you like thrillers, scary movies, horror movies, you got to go see it. Stop listening now and then come back and finish listening later. Okay, so Blair Witch Project. Saw this in the theater on the first night, knew nothing about it, and loved it up and down. Got out of the movie, called my friends and said, we're going to the movie tomorrow night. And I went back the next night to see it with a group of people who had not seen it yet. And I watched them as much as I watched the movie to watch their reactions to what was going on the screen, because I felt that the movie hit you on all the right notes and caused such an emotional response. I was going to enjoy seeing their reaction to what was on screen as much, if not more, than what I saw on the screen the night before. And it delivered in every sense that I thought it would. And then working in the video store, when it finally came out on video, 6 months later, a lot of people missed it when it came out in the theater. They had heard that it was this hit, but they didn't know a lot about it. And since the movie is all supposed to be, hey, we found this footage, and then they've released it as a movie, and people came into the video store and they genuinely thought that's what it was. And we decided in our particular store not to correct that. If they thought it was real, we're like, oh man, this isn't for everyone. And some customers, when they came back, were genuinely upset. Like, I can't believe that they made that. I can't believe that your company is allowing you to rent this movie. And then we'd come clean and go, no, it's fictionalized. And they were like, but because they genuinely thought it was real, it provoked an emotional response that they probably wouldn't have had if they had understood right from the get-go that it was fake. I love the fact that this movie cost, I think they had a shoestring budget. I want to say like under $1 million, which, I mean, hey, not that $1 million is chump change by any stretch of the imagination, but to produce this kind of quality filmmaking, it was unlike anything that had come out before it, and it spawned so much imitation, some of it good, a lot of it bad, a lot of it done for laughs. It is a staple of 90s movies, and I don't think you can talk about 90s movies and not at least mention it, and how it, again, pushed that independent film idea forward. Here's a fantastic, like, I think it made like $100 million, and they're like, it cost $1 million to make, it made $100 million. How can you not like that kind of return on investment? Okay, studios, pay attention. Every year, flag $1 million for 2 or 3 separate movies. Go. You don't have to have a hit every time. But if you can get one Blair Witch Project, it's going to pay for all the rest of them. And you might get lucky. You might get more than one of them. So anyway.
I'm going to throw some numbers at you, Caveman. The movie, the budget for the film was $60,000, and the box office was $250 million.
Wow, I was so off on both directions.
Pretty profitable.
Insane.
Pretty profitable. Yancy, what are your thoughts on Blair Witch? Came out in your favorite year of movies, 1999. What do you think?
I think the Blair Witch Project is awesome. And Chris, I think you of all people could appreciate the fact that there isn't CGI. There's very, very little editing. Yep. And this was, we're talking about, kind of like themes and, things that saw resurgences and trends and stuff like that of the 90s. The Blair Witch Project, the OG found footage film. And think about all the copycats that basically tried to capture that same idea of, people in like a disparate position, and found footage, and like you see what happened to them after the fact.
Paranormal activity and all that stuff. Yeah,
you kind of know what's happening to them. It's kind of like a foregone conclusion that this was found footage, aka like most likely all these people are dead. So like all of a sudden, after that, we saw like the advent of like all the paranormal activity movies and Cloverfield and like Diary of the Dead, and like there were a bunch of copycats that were kind of like this, and some of them have merit and some of them are pretty interesting, but to its credit, how often do you see like a movie that's the first to do something and kind of remains on that pedestal as like the greatest of like a particular subgenre of anything, and like it still is up there. It's still a classic, and most of the scripting was completely ad lib. It was just people going out in the woods and playing a part and acting like real human beings. That's something we keep saying tonight for like the 3rd or 4th time. People talking and acting and interacting like real people would, and not actually being super scripted. And I think that's why it works so well. It's an awesome freaking movie. It really is awesome. I'm a fan of it as well. I saw it in the theater twice when it came out. I thought it was great. One of the things I like about it is it's minimalistic, as you mentioned. And, we've talked before on this podcast, Yancy, about one of the things I like about Jaws is the fact that it's what you don't see in the movie that scares you. And that's what I liked about this. It's what you don't see anything. It's what you don't see that's terrifying. In the end of the movie, when the guy's standing in the corner, it's like, it's terrifying. You don't see the witch, but she's making him stand in the corner. Like, oh my God, it's so scary that it's just, it's terrifying. And I actually like this movie. It was very controversial because it got a lot of criticism and stuff. But me personally, I'm with you guys. I thought it was great. So I just like to go around, to each of it. Again, Caveman, we'll start with you. What are some of your favorite movies of the 90s and why?
So I won't repeat ones we've already talked about, but sure. I feel that this has to be talked about tonight. Boogie Nights, 1997, Paul Thomas Anderson, yes, Boogie Nights.
God, it was good.
Unfortunately, this week we lost Burt Reynolds. I believe he died of a heart attack. He was in his 80s.
81,
he was, thank you. A great actor, appeared in arguably some of the best movies of the 70s. Smokey and the Bandit, for sure. Cannonball Run was great. Chris, you and I texted back and forth about this, and we were just rhyming off our favorite Burt Reynolds movies. But Boogie Nights, for me, is a great movie all around. As much as I've actually said that I believe Pulp Fiction is a perfect movie, Boogie Nights to me is like right behind it. It is great. The only criticism I have is that maybe it's a little bit too long.
Oh my.
It's
no pun intended.
Yeah. You look at the cast of Boogie Nights, and it's a star-making vehicle for all of them. Like almost everybody who was in that movie has been nominated for an Oscar. Some of them for their performances in that movie. Paul Thomas Anderson, the director, for directing that movie. It is so good. You have so many great actors sort of at the start of what are becoming fantastic careers, and this movie just I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. Obviously, given that it's about, the 70s porno industry, it's not going to be for everyone. You're not going to want to sit and watch it with your mother, I wouldn't think, just given the subject matter. But it is a fantastic film, and I can't say enough good things about it.
Anything else? Any other movies that you wanted to mention? That are your favorites?
Heat, 1995, Michael Mann.
There's
Heat.
a good one.
Love it. First time you get Pacino and De Niro in a movie in the same scene together. I love it. There's another one that has great dialogue. Michael Mann started in TV, moved into movies. Like, he knows how to tell a story. He knows how to do pacing. He's got his own unique camera style. Like, when you're watching a Michael Mann movie, there is no doubt it's a Michael Mann movie. And this one, to me, like, I'm not usually a cops and robbers kind of genre, not usually my thing, but again, I've got a list of my top 20 favorite movies, and like Heat, I think ranks in there like number 5, number 6. Boogie Nights, right around the same place. Those are definitely two staples. Shawshank Redemption, we only mentioned it for a second, but I think almost everybody who listens to this podcast probably loves The Shawshank Redemption, I would hope. So I don't think we really have to go into too much on that. And I think all my other favorites we've really already touched on. So
okay, Yancy, what are some of your favorite movies from the 90s then?
Obviously The Matrix.
Of course.
All the animated movies like Aladdin, Lion King, Toy Story. I'm not saying that to be funny. Like, I literally think that they're like amazing pieces of art, and it takes a special type of creativity to appeal to both adults and children and to be funny and appropriate for both age groups. That is like an art form that is not talked about enough. That is incredibly hard to do. Like, like watching Finding Nemo for the first time, and you go with an audience that is filled with a bunch of kids and all their parents, and their parents are like in tears just crying because it is so clever. That's something that's really, really special. Boogie Nights is awesome. I wouldn't know if I would put it like as one of my favorite movies, but I was late to that. Caveman, I was like maybe 5 years ago when I watched it for the first time. Because like you said, kind of conservative parents, not something that they were like privy to like just let us watch as like teenagers and stuff. But so yeah, late to that. I remember watching Saving Private Ryan for the first time, and it was so haunting, just like Schindler's List too. Those were like the most like visceral, like that made war real to me, those two movies. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden I realized like, wow, this is awful. This is what human beings are capable of. And this is just a movie. This isn't even like the realest of the real. And of course, like probably the consensus best movie of the 90s, Miss Doubtfire.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, right.
I wasn't sure if that was part of that 90s humor I don't get or not.
Yeah,
Did I lose you guys?
Oh, man. So I'll mention a couple ones, too. Like, obviously, Pulp Fiction and Jurassic Park are, like, big ones for me. Saving Private Ryan, I'm glad that you mentioned, because I remember when I was a little boy, my grandpa used to tell me about the war. He wouldn't tell me, like, awful stories and stuff, obviously, but he would tell me a little bit about the war. And so my grandfather, just as an aside, was stormed the beaches of Normandy with the Canadian troops, and obviously lived to tell about it. I wouldn't be here. But he would tell me a little bit about it, and I would think, and I would even say to him, Grandpa, it's not true. Like, there's no way that happened. I can't believe that was true. And years later, he died. And then years later, I watched Saving Private Ryan, and I just cried like a baby at the beginning of the movie because I was like, oh my God, it was just so real and so visceral. Like, I couldn't believe it. So that's one. I would say that there was three ones that stand out for me: a drama, a comedy, and an independent film. The independent film was Waiting for Guffman. Came out in 1996. I've mentioned before that I loved Spinal Tap. Yancy, I made you watch it on the podcast. Because of the popularity of Spinal Tap, Christopher Guest got to make a couple other movies. And one of them was called Waiting for Guffman. And it's about this small town that decides to put on a play. And then this guy is a director and he wants to take it to Broadway. It's small, silly movie. But if you've never seen it or never heard of it, watch Waiting for Guffman. It's great. The comedy, for me, like I said, comedy kind of died in this decade. But one that stands out that just gets me, and it's just, it's so fun. It's so fun to watch. And I'm not a big fan of Jim Carrey. I hate to admit it. I'm not his biggest fan.
Well, have we talked about this on the show?
I don't know if we've actually mentioned it on the show. No,
that's honestly, Chris. That's one of like your hotter takes.
Yeah, I know. I know he's Canadian and everything like that. I used to like him on In Living Color, but his film career, things like Ace Ventura and stuff like that, I didn't really like. The Mask was pretty good, but this movie I thought was the perfect vehicle for him, and that was 1997's Liar Liar.
Yep. Chris, I can stop you.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with everything. I'm like you. I like Jim Carrey when he was on In Living Color. Have not been a fan of his film career at all, except for Liar Liar.
There's something about it is the perfect vehicle for him because it allows him to be improvisational and manic, but it also constrains him. I think maybe because it's the fact that he's playing a lawyer. There's something that just kind of keeps him grounded somewhat, so he doesn't go off. Like, to me, Ace Ventura is just unwatchable. Like, it's just out of control. It's not even watchable. But this one is funny. It's manic. It's a lot of fun to watch. So Liar Liar. And this one might surprise you, but it's from 1991, and it's My Girl. It just feels so 90s to me, this movie, but it's a really, really good movie. And to me, this movie explores all the themes that a movie should. It explores things that make you look at humanity. It's funny. It's got some touching moments to it, but it's also really, really deep and profound, and it's really about friendship. And so I always like that movie a lot. And it's one that I'm still waiting because my kids are still a bit young, but once they get old enough, this is a movie that I can't wait to show them and then sit down and talk about afterward. I think it's an important movie. I think it's an overlooked but important movie from the 90s. So that's kind of my take. But I will say also, of all the best movies that we talked about, I got to give a shout out to the worst movie from the 1990s. And that is, in 1999, The Phantom Menace is the worst movie to come out of the 1990s. So I did have to definitely mention that one. Anyway, time now, guys, to play some
Fun with Yancy.
Okay, so guys, what we're going to do, we do, trivia and stuff. You've been on the show enough, Caveman, to know how this works. So what I decided to do is I thought we'd have some trivia this week. And as you know, like I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of the Oscars. I like the Oscars. You know the Oscars as well. So I thought that I'd do some 90s Oscars trivia with you guys. Okay? Only movies from the 90s, Oscars. And I'll ask some questions and just throw it out there. Okay? And I'll keep score. Okay, and then we'll see who has the best score, and whoever has the best score gets to come up here to Canada with me and play an entire game of Escape from the Death Star.
All expenses paid?
All expenses paid. Trip to come to Barrie, Ontario, and to come in here in my basement, and we're going to play Escape from the Death Star. So there's a lot at stake here, Yancy. So, I'll be paying for tickets for you to get up here. So, man, I got to make these really hard so Yancy doesn't get them. Okay, so are we ready with some 90s Oscar trivia? Here we go. Okay, so Titanic, we mentioned that on the podcast today. It won Best Picture in 1997. But what was the winner of Best Song that year?
Candle in the Wind.
My Heart Will Go On.
Yes, it was the song from Titanic. I thought it was an easy one. My Heart Will Go On. Okay, that's 1 for Caveman, 0 for Yancy. Thank God. I don't want to pay for his flight up here. Okay, this trilogy saw all 3 of its films nominated for Best Picture, including this entry in 1990. What trilogy saw all 3 nominated for Best Picture?
Terminator?
Terminator would be incorrect, Yancy.
I'm going to guess Godfather.
It is The Godfather. Yes, The Godfather Part 3 in 1990.
Part 3 was 1990. I thought it was the 80s. That's why I wasn't sure.
The original won Best Picture in 72.
Godfather comes up so much. God, I really need to watch the Godfather movies.
Oh, man.
Just
I'm
the first 2, buddy. Don't waste your time with the third one.
No, the third one is not worth watching. But the original, like I say, won Best Picture in 72, and Godfather Part 2 won Best Picture in 74. Okay, a nominee for Best Actress in 1990. This actress was the highest paid female actress of the decade. Can you name her?
Sorry, of the 90s?
Yep. Who was the highest paid female actress of the 90s? She was a nominee for Best Actress in 1990.
Can you give us a hint?
I think I know. Did she go on to win an Oscar in the early 2000s?
She did.
Yancy, any guesses?
I mean, I'm going to say like a Julia Roberts.
Oh, Yancy gets a point. Yes, it was Julia Roberts. Congratulations.
Was it really?
Yep.
Pretty woman.
That's right. Okay, in the 90s, this actor became only the second person ever to win consecutive Best Actor Oscars. Who was he?
Tom Hanks.
That's correct. Caveman. I'll tell you what.
I wasn't giving you that one. I was taking it.
Go for it, because he won Best Actor for Philadelphia in 93 and Forrest Gump in 94. So, as I just mentioned, Hanks, he became the second person ever to win consecutive Best Actor Oscars for a 2-point bonus. Can you name the first actor to win consecutive Best Actor Oscars? Did not take place in the 90s.
I've heard this question before, and for the life of me, I want to say Spencer Tracy, but I don't think that's correct.
Spencer Tracy is correct. Captain Courageous in 37 and Boys Town in 38. All right. Oh, this is good. This is gonna save me some money paying for his flight up here to play Escape from the Death Star. So this is great. Okay, so throughout the whole decade of the 90s, Martin Scorsese, one of our greatest directors of all time, he was only nominated for Best Director once in the 1990s. Name the movie that he was nominated for.
I'm going to disagree with the premise of the question because I don't think that's right.
It is.
The narrator says
it's correct. I disagree heartily.
Okay. Yancy, you got any guesses before I try to correct Chris?
Not a guess, just like a comment that, I mean, I hope you did your stretching because you're carrying me the entire segment. So,
well, see, I know if it's only one, it's either Goodfellas in 1990 or Casino in 1995. And I was fairly certain Casino got nominated. But now that you're saying it's only one, I've got to think it was Goodfellas. So I'm going to go with Goodfellas.
It was Goodfellas in 1990. In Casino, he got nominated for, I believe it was for the screenplay, but not for Best Director.
Oh, okay.
So that's why. Miramax, we mentioned them earlier. Okay, so they obviously had a really dominant run in the 90s and basically took over Hollywood, right? But when it came to winning Best Picture Oscars, they only took home 2 statues in the 1990s. Can you name either one of Miramax's 2 Best Picture winners from the decade of the 90s? Gentlemen.
No, I don't think I can.
Yancy?
I can think of lots of movies that they were nominated for other awards for, but
Yancy, any Miramax pictures to win Best Picture in the 90s? 2 of them won. Can you name one?
I'm gonna go with Home Alone.
No,
I'm gonna take a guess. If
take a guess.
I assume that
take a guess.
Miramax. Okay, so I know they did Good Will Hunting, but Good Will Hunting didn't win Best Picture.
I'm sorry, time's up. Yeah. It was The English Patient in 96 and Shakespeare in Love in 98.
What was the one in 98?
Shakespeare in Love.
That's right. They totally did Shakespeare in Love.
All right, so final question. What actor received the most Oscar nominations in the decade of the 1990s?
Oh, good question.
When you say actor, does that mean that it is a male, or are you grouping actors and actresses
It
together?
is a male actor. So what male actor received the most Oscar nominations in the decade of the 90s?
Tom Hanks feels like it would be too chalky, and that was already a trivia answer. So it has to be.
That. I think that might be the answer.
Is that your answer, Caveman? Speaking of the 90s, is that your final answer?
Yeah, I'm going to let Yancy decide if he wants that pick or not.
I feel like it's too chalky, and I stand to lose nothing here because everybody already knows that I'm a moron. So I'm going to go off the board, and I'm going to say, and I can't even name another actor. I'm going to say Tom Hanks because I can't think of anybody else.
Right. In that case, since we don't want to have the same answer, I'm going to say Jack Nicholson.
Okay, you'd both be incorrect. It was Anthony Hopkins. Got 4 nominations.
Really?
Yes. He got nomination for Best Actor for Silence of the Lambs in 91. Best Actor Remains of the Day in 93. Nixon in 95. And Best Supporting Actor for Amistad in 97.
Oh, yeah, Amistad. I totally forgot about that. That's the forgotten Spielberg movie that nobody's ever seen except me.
Okay, so Caveman takes over the prize with 6, and Yancy, you had 1. Caveman, you and I will be getting together shortly. We will talk about this off the air, about when we can get together and play Escape from the Death Star, and that'll be just wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. In the meantime...
Whoa, Caveman 1 trivia. What an upset.
Wait. You're telling me the guy you brought on to talk about a specific topic got all the trivia questions for that topic? That's crazy.
It's called Fun with Yancy for a reason. We mess with him.
You mean to tell me the guy that wasn't 2 during these trivia questions got more questions correct? Whoa!
Wow.
Oh, brother. Well, like I said, you can ask me questions about the 70s. I was 2 at the time, and I can probably do good. But that's, like I say, it's Fun with Yancy. We just mess with you. So we almost call it Messing with the Millennial. That's the better title for this segment. So before we wrap things up, obviously I want to give a shout out to you, Caveman. Do you want to let people know where they can get in touch with you online?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Amron _DM. That's like Cameron without the C, AMERON _DM. Honestly, I'm not on Twitter as much as I used to be, but I do check it periodically. If you really want to reach out to me, you can try and friend me on Facebook. I really don't care about my privacy, and I accept everyone's friend requests. So
yeah, and you can obviously reach Yancy on Twitter at Yancy Eaton and myself at C McBrien. Yancy, before we go, next week, what I'd like to do is I'd like to throw a Gen X movie at you that I want you to watch before we come back on our next show. And on our next show, we are going to pick apart the movie and we're going to review it together. Are you ready for this challenge, my friend?
I mean, yeah, I guess.
the enthusiasm
from the trivia, I'll find whatever.
Yeah. The enthusiasm with which he throws things. He's just pissed because he doesn't get to come up to Canada and play Escape from the Death Star with me. I'm for real.
There was a small part of me that was like, free vacation, I'm down. You know,
until he gets here and there's snow on the ground, and then we're spending all of our time playing Escape from the Death Star with a bunch of missing pieces. You know,
of course, there would be a catch where like you literally sent me to like the Arctic in like the middle of January or something.
Exactly. You know, that's what everyone's perception of Canada is anyway. So there you go. You're from Florida. You wouldn't know the difference. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back. We've mentioned comedies. You know, on the show, we've mentioned romantic comedies. We've mentioned John Hughes. I want you to go back and watch what I would consider to be a staple from Gen X, and that's 1984's 16 Candles. Are you ready, Yancy, for a good one? You're going to go back. You're going to watch 16 Candles from 1984. Next show, we're going to come back and we're going to talk all about it. You up for the challenge?
I'm up for it. Mentioned this before, 1984. I have a love affair with that year just because it's when my parents graduated high school, and it's also the year they got married. So, like, I've never seen it. I hear people referencing it all the time, so I'm down. Let's do it.
It is a Gen X staple, like I said, so it should definitely be a good one.
But I will caution you, Yancy, much like when you watch Revenge of the Nerds, and like you mentioned earlier tonight, 16 Candles is great. It's got a lot of quotable lines that you'll be like, oh, that's where that's from. But there's a lot of humor that is not kosher by today's standard whatsoever.
Not. And it's very dated too, I think. But
dated.
I'm curious to know if it holds up. That's the main thing that I want to know, because I think a lot of Gen Xers that listen to this show love that movie. You know, it holds a special place in their heart. I was thinking about giving them Caddyshack. Caveman. I was thinking about making him watch Caddyshack, and I thought, I don't know. I'll get him to that one at some point. Like I say, that's one of Caveman and I's favorite movies of all time. But we'll watch 16 Candles. We'll come back and we'll do that, and then we'll go from there. So again, if you're interested in reaching out to us, you know, connect with us on Twitter at C McBrien or at Yancy Eaton, or go to the website popgoesyourworld.com. All of our information is there. Until next time, on behalf of Caveman and Yancy Eaton, this is Chris McBrien saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at C McBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.